Has this ever happened to you? You're on your third round of an interview, everything's going okay, and then all of a sudden they say, well, after interviewing you for 3 hours, we kind of realize we don't really trust what you're telling us. So, how about you give us one of your completed games, the entire Git repository, so we could go through the source code and, verify what you're saying? When I asked for one of theirs, they laughed in my face. Handing over one of my entire Git repositories for one of my private games is not a compromise I was willing to make. This is a true story. And this is what happened. In my previous hunt for a job, I had a really interesting one. I got to the end of the third interview, over 3 hours of conversations, and everything was going pretty good. Then they asked me this: can you zip up one of the Git repositories for one of your finished games and email it to us? That's where this story gets a bit interesting. I traditionally look for roles in backend software development, usually working in AWS, TypeScript, Python, things like that. That's what I look for. But then, in our local market, a game studio popped up and was pretty close. And they used Unity, which is what I use, but they were also using a framework that I built my first ever game in. This framework is called Cocos 2DX. I had used a previous version, but I had used Cocos 2DX as well. So I am a game developer. Since 1998, I've been making games, and I've been professionally releasing them since 2009. I own a game company. It's a registered business. It pays taxes and does all those things. So yeah, I applied. I felt like this would be a natural fit. So we had 3 interviews. The first one, social. Let's get to know each other. It was me, the founder, and I think the lead engineer. And it was 30 minutes in. It was a good vibe. And I felt like I held my own. And I thought it was a nice way to get to know each other. So then they called right away and scheduled the second interview the next day. It was supposed to be for an hour, but we went an hour and a half. So we actually went over because I thought we were really enjoying talking to each other. And I told them this story. And because they ask, oh, is there a time when you've done something that you're proud of? And I said, yes, I have this very clear story that I'm very proud of. Is when I went to my previous employer, they had this big complex database, and it was costing a whole bunch of money, and we were paying third parties to do this stuff. And I said, well, how about we just use a single table design using something called DynamoDB and single table? And I kind of pitched it, and the manager's like, no, let's just keep going. And I'm like, well, I'm the only developer at this time, so it's really me being responsible for this, and I'm technically the lead. And I've built this before. So I actually just built it. It only took a few days to get the prototype up and running, and then I showed it, and I just kind of said, yeah, this is what we're going with. And in the end, I ended up saving the company well over $125,000 a year. And in the end, my manager at the time said no initially, but then took credit for it afterwards because it's now a core system in our thing. And that's actually now how we build things out because of the cost efficiencies of it. So then on the third interview, so we ran out of time on that second interview when I told that story, and lots of other technical things. They asked about how do I program, and I told them, I use kind of async methods, and they're like, that's quite new. We don't do that yet. I'm like, yeah, you should check it out. And I mentioned some of the libraries I use, and I make card and puzzle games. If you've seen my games, I'll put a link in the description if you're curious. I make card and puzzle games. That's kind of my thing. This company made kind of animal simulation style games. So very different genres. But once again, the task I applied for was to take an old game from an old engine and put it in a new engine. It was really a porting job. It just happened to be a game, but it was something I could do. So on the third interview, they said, okay, Michael, we ran out of time. How about you ask us some questions? So, okay. And I don't really have a lot to ask, but I asked a couple, what's culture like? What's this? How do you do your deployment? General stuff. There wasn't too much for me to ask. I didn't really have too many strong questions. But then, about a third of the way through, the tone changed. And they said, well, we have some points we'd like to bring up with you, some concerns. I've never met you, so concerns is interesting. The other weird thing is on the third interview is one of the interviewers was completely out of frame the entire time. So I was like when they're speaking, I was trying to look, but you can only see their shoulder. So probably had a befuddled look on my face. But the interview was set up that I was just going to ask some questions and we were going to wrap up the interview. And yeah, so the lead developer goes, yeah, that story you told us yesterday about that database, that's raised some concerns with us internally. Your manager said no, and you did it anyway. And I said, well, yeah, and I explained why, and they kind of nodded, said, oh, okay. But now I was on the back foot. Now I'm like, well, this is a weird pivot. Then they asked, okay, you mentioned that you wanted to run your own business, and we're looking for people who really just want to stick around a bit. Well, of course I want to run my own business. That's always been my goal. I've never been shy about that. Even in the first two interviews, I told him that is my goal, is I would love to do what I do on the side full time. I've been making games and software for many years. It'd be great if that was my main income. But until then, I have a day job. So I wasn't saying I was going to run and gun. I was just saying I have a goal. It's on my vision board, and that's what I'm going towards. I can't guarantee you that if the opportunity arises that I'd stick around. I stayed at my last company for over 10 years, so I am sticky. I just really hope one day I could do what I want to do. And then they said, well, most of our staff here, and the development teams especially, are young. How would you feel about taking direction from somebody that is much younger than you? And they actually used numbers. I won't repeat those numbers, but they used numbers. And now I'm feeling old. Now I'm feeling like they're coming after my age, which is funny because the people on the call are only slightly younger than me. Okay. And I said, well, that's not an issue. It never has been an issue. I coach 10-year-olds and I learn from them every day. Yeah, it was interesting. I didn't really know how to take that. And I just kind of said, yeah, that's not an issue. I work with people of all demographics, ages, genders. It doesn't matter. If their opinion's right, I'll take it. If it's not, I would like to be given the opportunity to discuss it. I won't lie. I do have a hard time if someone says, do this because I say so, versus let me explain to you why we need to do this. The why is always important. Even if I don't agree, if I know the why, okay, I'm on board. So I'm being calm. I'm letting the conversation go, but I feel like now I'm being managed out of a role I haven't even been offered yet. Then it gets really weird. They say, well, you make your own games, so we're a little bit worried about the conflicts of you making games. That's like working in a restaurant, them saying, oh, we're worried that you cook at home. But I said, well, it's fine. I said, first of all, I have a game company. I don't just make games. I've been making games actually longer than your company's been around. But to clarify, you make critter collection games where you collect little creatures, you grow them, you do all that type of stuff. I don't make those type of games. I make puzzle games, I make card games, I make word games. There's no overlap. Then they said, well, actually, we're thinking of making some puzzle and word games. Right. A 50-plus person studio telling a solo developer that he can't do what he does. The only reason they're talking to him, he can't do that, but they're going to continue doing it. And we haven't even gotten to the salary yet. 3+ hours, 3 phone calls. I've been polite. I knew it was going to be rough, but they finally offered it. So usually in salaries, you have a 15% spread. And this is, let's say it's from $100 to $115. That is your spread for that role. So if it's a junior role, it'd be a 15% spread, an intermediate 15, senior 15. That's normal. Their salary range had a 40%, 45% spread on it. That is covering all 3 ranges from junior, intermediate, senior. And actually what they're looking for was a solo person to come in and do this massive porting by themselves because their current people are too busy. So it would be a different role, I'd think, altogether. But anyways, when you have a 40% swing that you're advertising, you don't know what you're actually hiring for. And the highest end of the range they gave me would have been 60% less than my previous salary. I know gaming pays not great, but I was surprised. And I asked them, I said, oh, this is very interesting. Why do you think gaming pays so poorly? Because you are telling me how your titles make millions of dollars, et cetera, et cetera. So why do you pay your staff so poorly? And they said, well, people do this because they love it. And, it's really fun for them. And, they learn. And so, well, yeah. But do you know what I really love doing? I love paying my mortgage and taking my family on holiday. Now it gets really weird. So now they ask me this question. Oh, well, we're not sure how you program. We want to understand more about the way you design and implement software. Can you send us a complete repository, zipped up repository? So this includes all the history of my code, of one of your finished games, the full entire source code. I said no. I said I've never been asked that. I'm like, I have 20 games out there on the App Store. You could go play them. They actually did play them. That's how I got the interview. I put them in my resume. But I did say this. I said, you know what? What I'm more comfortable doing is doing a screen share. I'll walk you through my code and you can ask questions and we can look at it. They said, no. We want the entire code base. So let's pause for a second. This is a company that has 50-some staff making one type of game. They have admitted that they are thinking of branching into other types of games, which happen to be the type of games I make and the type of games they played when I put them on my CV. And they're saying for, just technical clarification, we want to see the entire source code to one of your games. The analogy I give people who are not programmers, I say, let's say you had an Italian restaurant that served spaghetti and you wanted to start making pizzas. So you interview a guy who makes pizzas. And as part of the interview, you say, before we hire you, can you give us all of your recipes with detailed instructions on how to make it? Just to make sure we're on the same page, that's all. So I turned it around. I said, actually, how about this? Can I have the source code to one of your games? It could even be one of your unfinished ones, just one of your ones close to being shipped. And I'll review it and I'll see if there's any discrepancies in how I program. And then we could talk about that. They laughed. They're like, no, wait, we wouldn't do that. That's ludicrous. So I thanked them for their time. They reminded me to send them the code. I thanked them for their time again and hung up. I took a beat. Here I am, still unemployed at this time, looking for work. I'm entertaining. I've put 3.5 hours into talking with these people. And they spent half of this call attacking my credibility, calling me old, offering me money I haven't made in 25 years, or 20 years maybe. So I wanted to ask people about this. Maybe I'm being sensitive. So I didn't have anyone around me at that moment. I was home alone. So I went to Claude. I went to ChatGPT and I said, hey, here's the situation. I actually had a transcript of it because the meeting thing we were on recorded all of it and transcribed it. So I said, here, without me embellishing, this is a transcript of what just happened. Don't worry, there's no names or anything in there. Can you tell me if this is a reasonable request around giving them source code? And both those systems said no. They said this is an unusual request. That's usually, and they said even you supplied an alternative that they refused. So then I'm like, okay, let me ask more people. So I called a friend who's a developer, and he makes games. And I said, hey, how about this? And he's like, no way. Went to my wife, went to my friends. Everyone said that's insane. Even people who know nothing about development. Went to my kids. They're like, no way. You don't give away your IP. So the real lesson here is that there was red flags early on, very early on. I just didn't read them. I wanted to give everyone the benefit of the doubt. I wanted to see where this went. I wanted to see if maybe I could be convinced to take a pay cut and work on something fun. It sounds like the work would not have been fun. It sounds like the culture would not have been a fit for me. But the fact that they blatantly told me they didn't trust me, but I needed to trust them. So it was offensive. I didn't trust them, but they didn't trust me. The source code thing wasn't random. That wasn't just something out of left field. It was a pattern that emerged, and it just culminated to that. We're in a small market. New Zealand is a tiny market. I'm unemployed. So you talk yourself into things. You kind of ignore the signs because you place yourself into, no matter what interview you go, you'd be like, yeah, okay, yeah, I can see this working. I can see this working. Yeah, I can look over the things that normally I'd laugh at if I was employed. So I didn't dodge a bullet on this one. I probably dodged about 15 of them. The lesson I learned is just trust your gut. Trust your gut earlier. It's hard. It's hard, especially when you're in a vulnerable position. But I should have known after halfway through the second call, we didn't need to go to that third one. But where did I end up? I have a job. I'm in my first week at being there. I'm actually going to start work later today. I get up very early to record these. And this was an unexpected role. And sometimes the right door is the one you are never even looking at. My name is Michael, and I'm a creator with a day job.